Hi, welcome to Industries Live. This is a show that we are on every other Tuesday, and we are excited to be joining you again today. I am Dr. Karen Hildebrand. I lead solutions architects in some of our industries at AWS. So I sit on the technical side of the house, and I have a background in artificial intelligence. So I'm really excited about today's conversations. I think they'll be super topical, but also really interesting to our financial services organizations, as well as many of our customers who are dealing with these same types of challenges, but may not be in financial services. So excited to join you today. I am joining from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I just returned from Lithuania. So I am super curious where all of you are joining us from. So please today, throughout the discussion, drop in the comments where you're joining us from, any questions you have, and I will be watching the comments as they come in live. And I'm joined today by my co-host, Addy. Addy, would you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Karen. Hey, everyone. I'm Addy Dubhashi. I've had the chance to be with AWS for the past 7 years and have led financial services partnerships, where my team is part of the Center of Excellence, where we build industry solutions that enable our customers to accelerate to the cloud and drive transformation. What's really exciting to our team is when our partners come together with AWS to solve a unique line of business challenge. And so we're not kind of thinking about the technical aspects of a business goal, but rather the business challenges, how we solve for them, how we can bring about compliance and solve for those business economics that customers ask us for. And so one of the most interesting topics, having a background in banking and having been in a investment bank in the past, I've seen in real time how risk is right at the heart of their decision making. And so having the right systems in place is so important. And so really excited about our conversation today with Smarsh and Genpact. Looking forward to that.
That's fantastic. And I think you hit on a good point there, Addy, that AWS has invested in industry experts and people that have worked in those specific industries before coming to the technology side of the house. So most of our conversations in Industries Live and beyond, as we're talking to our customers, are really about what are they trying to solve, less so about the cloud services that are behind that. So we won't be talking a lot about AWS services here today. We'll talk a lot more about what we're actually solving for our customers and how partners are able to accelerate that effort. So with that, let's bring our first partner on. Brandon, perfect. Brandon, are you able to hear us? Hopefully all good.
Loud and clear.
Awesome. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, happy to. And thank you all for having me. I'm Brandon Carl. I work at Smarsh, where I oversee our AI and machine learning efforts.
Fantastic. That leads us to the very next question. Tell us about Smarsh.
Wonderful. Yeah, so Smarsh is probably one of the biggest companies that many people have never heard of. What we do is we process communications data globally for the largest financial services institutions in order to keep the banks safe and the market safe and their customers safe. And we do that with very large-scale AI and machine learning built entirely on the backbone of AWS.
It's a fascinating space because these large institutions have such wide groups of teams. These are teams that often have to think about a certain business role and working on certain key instruments that have risk. But at the same time, you are working with teams and colleagues that should not be sharing information with other parts of the organization. Mm-hmm. There are regulatory frameworks here that help you, and that they're necessary for the market to operate smoothly and efficiently. And so it's such an important space to be in where Smarsh is. Even in our age today, with the number of communications that happen, our regulators are asking us to stay on top of a number of challenges around communication. So, Brandon, what are some of the common challenges you've seen, play out over the past year, and what are the asks coming in a post-Gen AI world?
Wonderful. Yeah, would love to talk about that. And I think to your point as well, in terms of the passion for solving this problem and the impact in terms of how financial services companies focus on this, I actually personally spent the first decade of my career on Wall Street. I worked in interest rate derivatives, which I call the good kind, not the evil kind. But I worked front of the lines in terms of both the mortgage crisis and the banking crisis side of that. And while I met many of the most amazing people I know in my life there, I also saw the impacts of misconduct and what happens when the system goes awry firsthand. And that's been a real passion as we built out this team over the past decade in terms of how we keep these firms safer. So when you fast forward to today, right, the core thing that the firms are trying to do is they're trying to ensure that by using communications data and other data, that they're keeping everything safe. Now, it's really a task that only machines can do at the scale that's necessary, right? You can't go hire a second bank to read through all of the communications of the first bank. You, in fact, need to use large-scale AI and machine learning. And so the three key trends that we have seen emerge over the past year or so, number one, there's been an open arms adoption with respect to AI and machine learning. People are saying, okay, we have an opportunity to really take the mission that we have, de-risking our firms in the markets much, much further on that front. And so the first aspect is that broad-based adoption of AI and machine learning. The second aspect is they're saying, okay, as we have machines that are doing more, what tools can we give to people to actually make them even better at their jobs? And we see a deep interest in terms of how they empower their teams further. And then the third key thing that we see rising up is obviously the broad-based use of generative AI. So before, it may be that you're watching for, inappropriate behaviors or signs in terms of employee to employee or employee to customer. Now you actually have the machine in the loop where the machines are talking to the employees or talking to the customers. And it's adding this new dimension in terms of, what happens when, in the event that there are risks that emerge out of that.
It's a fascinating space. One of the themes that emerges, the number of channels that have increased in our industry. Once upon a time, it was email and that's it. And if you're in office and in communications would follow memos. But in today's day, we have a number of these channels. We're hopping between Slack and our CRM tools. We're jumping into chats over email or our tools. But also, our devices are complex. And Smarsh is just at such an interesting space where you have to continually digest these multiple channels as you're constantly maintaining that context of surveilling the right aspects of trading and risk.
That's right. And I think that it's surprising to people who are not familiar with it exactly how many of those channels people communicate on. I mean, today you've probably obviously logged into email. We're here in terms of StreamYard. We're broadcasting to YouTube and Twitch and the like. Probably been on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, all of those sorts of things that are in place. And so for large firms, it's not uncommon for them to have 80 different channels. And the really interesting aspect is if you think about it, you have a different digital identity on every one of those channels. One of the things we do is we bring together those into a unified digital identity, which is how firms are then able to really get a deep understanding of what's happening.
I like your call out there of all of the different platforms that people might be joining us on as well. So we do have viewers that are joining us from LA and from India. So please drop in the comments where you're joining us from. It's always great to see some interaction from those that are with us here today. And I think your call out about specific communication challenge or channels that you have to monitor. And when you're thinking about that from a compliance standpoint, you've built the intelligent agent on AWS. Can you tell us a little bit about what is that solving for? Why did you build it on AWS? And why do our customers that are listening here today care?
Absolutely. It's been a really fantastic journey, and we've had a great account team to work with at AWS. We've also been able to partner with the industry as we've built this out. So if we take a look at the core challenge, I can then talk about what problem this solves and then how we solve this. But the core challenge, as I indicated, is that firms need to be able to surface evidence of misconduct or bad behavior, or bad actors within their companies. And fortunately, this is a problem that is incredibly rare and hard to find. So on average, it would take about 200,000 communications before you find one instance of misconduct. And that means that in comparison, your house would be about 100 times more likely to be hit by lightning in a year, than randomly looking at that. So it gives you an idea of how rare these things are. So on one hand, that's fantastic. None of us are wishing for a world in which case there are more bad actors or misconduct or the like. But on the other hand, it makes it almost impossibly difficult to find. And what that means historically is that firms are reading through far more communications than they need to. And that means that, more than 99 times out of 100 that they're looking at something, they're just not finding the sorts of things that they look for. And this is the problem that we solve with Intelligent Agent. By partnering with top partners in the industry, We took our AI and machine learning teams, who they're on their 8th book, by the way, that they've published. I can give a specific plug to that later. We brought them and gave them the specific problem of how do we emulate the expertise of a compliance analyst so as to make that entire workflow much, much more efficient. And it's required a variety of different techniques to land there, but we're really pleased by the results that we're seeing.
It's such an interesting challenge, and institutions have had to do this for a very long time. Maintaining complete oversight on surveillance was an requirements by the SEC, by FINRA. These regulations were in place so that key decision makers were not intentionally acting working as bad actors, but also was there any form of incorrect messaging that could be translated towards a actionable trade or an impact from that. And so context is so important in these scenarios. In a post-Gen AI world, you're going to have context so relevant because the amount of data being generated, the amount of documents and communications are going to go up. And so, Brandon, what do you see coming in this space? Because this is going to really shape communication journeys in an infinite world of data being generated.
Yeah, it's really, really fascinating. A couple different things. Let me start maybe with risk and legal and compliance, and then look in terms of more broadly. Within risk, legal, and compliance, it's really those two trends that I talked about, which is how do we, number one, make it so that there's less noise and more signal, right? How do we make sure that we have people focusing on the things that matter the most? And then when they find those things, how do we let them interact with agents or Gen AI to go and perform investigations for them and to engage in their data that way? And so within that specific use case, again, we're going to see people much more efficient in terms of how they swim through these copious amounts of data. But the second thing that's very clearly emerging is that whereas historically people viewed the company's communications almost as what they would call an archive, right? It's something that, we joke sometimes where data goes to die, right? That would have been a historical industry view of this. But what has happened now is everyone has woken to the concept that this is actually really valuable data, right? That within the communications, this is the lifeblood of your company. This is how you figure out how to service your customers better. It's how you make sure that you diffuse what we talked about with bad actors, reduce operational risks, those sorts of things. And so at all of these firms, the individuals in compliance are the stewards of this data. They actually have the right and the responsibility to govern that in the right way. And so these teams are finding themselves at the center of the firm's broader communications data strategy with intelligence on top of that. It's a really big trend, and I think we're really in the first inning of that right now.
I happened to read a very interesting report that y'all published where I think y'all were able to bring about 77% improvement in the efficiencies of these workflows, and then improving one of the hardest metrics out there, false flagging, by putting the right case forward up to 98%. I mean, these are unheard numbers. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey. And what we found, really two things. Number one, we could not operate at the scale that we do without AWS. And by scale, I not only mean the ways that we traditionally think about in terms of volume, but in terms of the global reach, right? In terms of the enterprise hardening and all of the different aspects that are required there. And then the second thing is you find that there's not just one tool for the job. A lot of times people will mentally go, all I need to do is say prompt, pretend you're a compliance analyst, and that Gen AI will fill in the blanks. And what we find in practice is it's obviously not that easy. You need entire scaffolding around systems. You need to make sure that you have versioning and rollbacks and controls and auditability. And you need to basically work through things like randomness that happens within these items. So it's an entire litany of different techniques that come together to make these things work in a performant way, but also in a way that firms can rely on them and be confident that they're not introducing systematic bias and all of those sorts of issues in place.
Brandon, I think we could talk for a very long time about all of the different techniques that you have to interplay against each other in order to be able to reduce that amount of false flagging, but also to take all of those signals in and, to your point, create a unified person out of all of the different devices and channels that they're able to communicate in. But I realize this is not a technical stream going down deep into the details of that, as much as I love it. But maybe you could share with us instead a little bit about some of the success you've seen in this space, and
Mhm.
maybe what you can tell us about what some of your enterprise customers are benefiting from when they've been working with you.
Absolutely. And I mentioned earlier that we've now been in this space for running production grade and large scale AI and machine learning for close to a decade. And through that, it requires, I think to your point, Karen, an ongoing evolution of the technologies that are in place. We've had an opportunity to work with over half of the top banks in the world with respect to the programs and how they do this. And the impacts that we find are along the lines of what we were indicating, where effectively it's changing the nature and the dynamic of their programs, where they can focus less on the noise and more on the true risks. But it's extending from there in terms of how do you approach things across languages, right? I think historically, machine learning was very Anglo-centric or very kind of English-oriented, and there's been a huge expansion in terms of how you approach that. It's extended from electronic or written communications to voice communications and how they actually de-risk their firms on that front. But really importantly, Karen, in addition to all of those benefits of de-risking the firms, of getting more efficient and offering the workers better experiences on that front, it's also now beginning to lay the template and the groundwork for how they approach different business lines. And that's that combination of basically results and compliance, right? Results for the employees, and then how you impact the broader business has really been a critical and important one too.
And
Yeah.
I actually just, it's going to be a shameless plug, Karen, but this is exactly why we really appreciate our financial services competency partner. So Smarsh is a competency partner. We recognize that specialization that they have for the industry, but a number of AWS teams actually double down because of that known specialization. So by taking that competency, we publish thought leadership out there together. We're driving go-to-market activities such as events and customer education webinars and seminars such as these, and then running those on-the-ground co-sell motions where we really think about showcasing and demoing these at our customers, making it really easy for them to get started, almost playing with, synthetic data to experience how the product can fit, and then driving investments into proof of concept. So yeah, just a quick shameless plug there, folks, but that's one of those go-to-markets that really work.
We often talk about that internally of like, we're not going to talk about this from a marketing standpoint, but indeed, I loved your shameless plug. That was fantastic, Addy. Of course, our competency partners are really helpful in helping our customers to find partners who have done this before. And I think, Brandon, what you were able to say there about having over a decade of production level workloads is exactly what we're talking about. I know that I came from a customer prior to joining AWS, and we had a bank charter at that time, and these same problems that you're describing are absolutely what we were doing a decade ago, just not as quickly and not as accurately as we can do now. And so I think that evolution and that constant striving to lower the cost of being able to do this level of kind of unified standards, unified communication protocols, et cetera, is really what's different about how Smarsh is approaching this. And I think that's why we really would like to share partners where we see it's, you have a distinct way of approaching the customer problem, and we want our customers to be able to see that. By the way, we did also get a new customer who is not shy in being able to say where they're from. So we have New Jersey joining in, but we'd love to hear from any of the other customers. Do you have questions that you want us to be asking Brandon here live? I am watching them on the side of the screen while Addy tees up the next question. So keep me busy. Let me know what questions you have as well.
My next question is going to get, forecasting and looking forward. I'm seeing an agentic world coming on. We recently launched our agentic marketplace. One of the simplest messages that came from one of our strategy partners was, the agents have agency. They're going to be able to take action. And now, when it comes to decreasing those false flags, when it comes to identifying how you can extend some of those repositories that you've generated, that nuanced concept, context that you've generated as Smarsh, how can we accelerate, an institution to make most of this data? I'm thinking out loud with asset managers in the future getting better at recommending the right products to their customers, but also, hey, wait a second, are we recommending something that's outside of the risk parameter of this particular end customer? And should we, know early on to protect ourselves and set those guardrails? So, Brandon, what are you seeing coming up?
Yeah. And one of the things you brought up, I think, is so critical, Addy, which is when I'm talking to firms, what I'm finding, and I'll hit on the governance piece in a minute, which I think is important, but many firms are only operating with 180-degree view of their data rather than 360, right? And what do I mean by that? If you think about an industry like even financial crime, it's common that people are looking for transactions that are just below $10,000, but they're ignoring communications where someone's talking about bribing a government official, right? Or if you look in, customer situations, they may be doing deep analysis on like what deal close rates look like and how their pipeline and funnel are coming together. But they're not getting real-time analytics in terms of the relationship with those customers and the like that you can see only through the communications data. So it's almost like they're, if the structured data is the matter in the universe, then the unstructured data is the dark matter, right? And then people are kind of going, wait a second, there's all of this information that exists there. And so now to your point about governance, in order to bring forward that intelligence, you actually have to govern that in, a very thoughtful way. When we bring on people to work for companies, we give them managers, right? They have performance reviews. There are checks and balances that exist. And those same things are existing now with, agents, right? In terms of the need to manage them and to understand that they're doing their job. And it's all the more important because you could scale out inaccuracy if you're not careful, right? And so what we end up saying with governance is really the importance of a number of different things, right? Number one, you have to have explainability and responsible AI. I think that's table stakes now in terms of what we hear and what we do in the market. The second thing, though, is the systems that govern that. You have to be able to have all of the technical things we talked about in terms of audits and version history and who made the change. But then you also finally need to be able to measure the agent's performance, right? Like if you're introducing a new one, did it do better than the last one? How is that actually performing in production and the like? And so all of those bits of scaffolding and that system of management, it's so critically important if firms are going to actually scale out this intelligence on that front.
Absolutely. I think there's a number of topics you touched on there. We really have to have foundational governance that can be reliable, scalable, and adapting in a way that is moving at the speed of Gen AI and agentic architecture. So we're really at the forefront of this space, but governance rules and best practices have been around. And so setting up those observability guidelines for an organization, setting out how agents should be logging activity, where they should be accessing data, where they shouldn't, is something that we have to just refine and shape. And so while AWS brings the tools, it's really important to construct this for an industry. And I think the position that Smarsh is in such a strong place to help and steer customers here.
We've been through it. Everything from regulatory audit through model governance for close to a decade now. In many ways, this industry has actually laid the groundwork for what those model risk management practices look like. And so it's absolutely something that's in, the lifeblood of what we do. But the key thing with any good regulation is you want to have the benefits and to put the guardrails in place, but then you want to automate as much of that as possible so that you can get low friction. Meaning, let's say that you have a wonderful new machine learning model that can give you a pulse of your customers, right? You don't want to have to wait for 12 months for that to get through approval gates. You want to be able to roll that out as quickly as possible. And that's only possible vis-a-vis working on platforms like SageMaker, right? Like integrating in all of the model cards and the different aspects and building that pipeline or that flow in the same way that if there's a new airplane coming out, it goes through wind tunnel testing and it has air traffic control and the like. All of those aspects need to exist for these agents and this intelligence.
So I think that decade of experience definitely sets you apart. And it's one of those opportunities for us to ask, what do you see in the future? What are the 2 to 3 things that you're keeping an eye on as Smarsh that you think that we should all be thinking about as well?
Yeah. I think that what we're going to find is that, and this is probably not a surprise, I think you hear it from a lot, but there's over the next decade, a lot is going to change, right? In terms of, we're already seeing how we interact with data is changing remarkably. And I think we're going to end up in a spot where the time from understanding or getting an insight to acting on that insight is just shrinking markedly, right? And so through that, what's going to end up happening is more and more of this intelligence within this communications data is going to shift from dark matter to being light, right? People are going to have a financial crime program that brings all of these things together. They're going to have an insider risk or security program that brings us together. Their customer aspects are going to bring that together. And I genuinely think when we look back a decade from now, we'll go, I can't believe that there was a time when we were only operating with half of the story. It's the biggest, there's a lot there technically that has to be done, Karen, but it's the biggest change that I see happening.
And I'm mindful of time, but I'll just add kind of 2 additional points there. So, a lot of this data and research that you're calling out, Brandon, is something that you all have shared in a fascinating white paper, the Smarsh Intelligent Agent. So we're going to be putting up those links in our follow-on submissions. It's going to go out to the audience and be available in the comments. You're also going to see a little bit about the infographics and the data points of what's coming up. And then last but not least, how to get in touch with the Smarsh team. And if you want to get started at the Easy Play on Marketplace. So I just want to call out those links that are accessible to the viewers.
It's been great to be a launch partner on that. And then if anyone's interested in the mini books, our Chief AI Officer, Dr. Uday Kamath, and the team has written an entire book on a deep dive on LLMs and deep learning.
We love having partners like yourselves on. This is a great opportunity for all of us that are here watching to get to learn. So thanks for sharing those links. Those will be in the comments. Those will be coming in here in real time in a little bit. Brandon, really appreciate it. One last 30-second plug. Sure. I know I said no marketing earlier. What's your pitch? What would you like everybody to do as they leave?
2 things. If you work in risk and compliance, reach out. We can have a major impact in terms of your program and your company. And second, if you're not in risk and compliance, go talk to your teams. They have data that can really help you move a lot of your initiatives forward. And the third, I'll add, work with AWS. It's been a fun journey for us.
Okay, we always love that kind of a plug. Thanks again, Brandon, for joining us here today. And everybody stay on. We will be back in about 20 seconds from now with our second partner guest. Appreciate your joining us on Industries Live.
Thank you for having me.